My name is Antella. I am 72 years old, and for the last 2 years, I have been a ghost in my own family's life. Have you ever felt like you've become part of the furniture? Useful, always there, but completely invisible until someone needs to sit down. I spent 40 years building a life. I raised Marco alone after my husband Roberto died of a cancer that ate him away in 6 months. I ran a business. I survived grief. But when Marco introduced me to Viviana, I fought. Finally, a daughter. I poured my bank account and my soul into their wedding. $3,000 for the buffet. All from my retirement savings. Hand-stitched centerpieces, hours spent coordinating vendors. I did it because I thought love was a currency. I thought if I gave enough, I'd finally be seen. It was a Tuesday. The air smelled of rosemary and the cookies I was baking for the wedding favor bags. I was happy, truly happy, until I heard voices in the garden. Marco's mom is going to watch the kids, all 15 of them. It was Viviana, but the voice wasn't the sweet, melodic one she used when she called me Mom Antella. It was cold, transactional, like she was talking about a piece of equipment she'd rented. The old lady will be in charge of the screaming brats while we dance, her sister Andrea laughed. She won't even realize we're using her. It keeps her busy, so she's not wandering around interrupting adult conversations with her boring stories. I stood behind my kitchen curtain, my hands still white with flour. That flour felt like ash. They didn't just want my money and my cooking. They wanted to erase me from the party. I was a professional free babysitter. I was a nuisance to be managed. Have you ever heard someone you love describe you as a burden? Stay with me, because at 72, I decided that being a good mother was no longer enough. I decided to be a legend. For 3 days, I wore a mask. When Viviana smiled at me, I smiled back. But inside, I was calling suppliers. Cancel the meat. Cancel the flowers. Cancel the hall decorations. I wasn't just canceling a wedding buffet. I was canceling the version of myself that allowed people to walk over her. I called my best friend, Gabriella. We didn't plan a protest. We planned an Independence Day. On the morning of the wedding, while the city woke up to the sound of bells, I woke up to the sound of silence. I put on a coral dress, not the mother of the groom dress they expected, but a dress that made me feel like Antella. I left a letter on the kitchen table. It wasn't a letter of anger. It was a letter of resignation. 2 hours away at a luxury spa, I turned my phone on. 43 missed calls. 26 texts. The messages moved through the 5 stages of grief. Mom, where are you? The kitchen is empty. The guests are here. There's no food. Viviana is crying. How could you do this? You're ruining our lives. We'll pay you $1,000. Just come and watch the kids. I called Marco back while receiving a chocolate massage. The sound of screaming children in the background was the most honest music I had heard in years. Marco, I told him, you're 45. If you have $2,000 to pay a nanny at the last minute, you had $2,000 to hire a caterer. You just preferred it when Mom paid for the privilege of being your servant. The silence that followed on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. But what Marco said next changed our relationship forever. You won't believe the ultimatum Viviana tried to give me. When I returned on Monday, Marco was at my door. He didn't look like a groom. He looked like a boy who had finally realized the world didn't revolve around him. We sat in the living room where I had raised him. I told him, "I am not your employee. I am the woman who gave you life. And if you can't respect that life, you don't get to have me in yours." Then came Viviana. She arrived without the makeup, without the facade. She told me about her own mother's death, about her insecurities. She apologized, not because the wedding was ruined, but because she realized she had traded a mother for a maid. It has been a year since the empty buffet. I didn't just get my son back. I got a real daughter-in-law. We don't pretend to be perfect. She cooks for me now. She asks, "Antella, are you available?" instead of saying, "Antella, we need you." I wrote my book, Cooking with Love, Serving with Dignity. It's a bestseller in our town. But the best part isn't the fame. It's the fact that when my grandchild is born, I won't be the woman hiding in the kitchen. I'll be the woman sitting at the head of the table, telling boring stories that my family finally realized are actually the most precious things they own. For the first time in my life, I stopped explaining myself. That alone felt unnatural. For days after overhearing that conversation, I moved through my routine like a ghost wearing my own face. I cooked, I cleaned, I answered calls, I nodded at plans, I smiled when expected. But inside, I was watching, listening, measuring. When Marco called to ask if I had confirmed the dessert order, I told him yes, even though I hadn't. When Viviana texted about seating arrangements, I replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Not because I was afraid, but because clarity had replaced emotion. There is something powerful about realizing you no longer need approval from the people who underestimate you. Viviana came by the house that Thursday afternoon. She walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking confidently against the floor. "I just wanted to check on you," she said sweetly. "You've been doing so much." I looked at her carefully. Her posture was relaxed. Her tone was warm. But her eyes were calculating, always checking what else could be taken without asking. "Oh, I'm fine," I replied, busy but happy. She smiled, relieved. "Good, because the wedding is already stressful enough. It helps knowing you're handling things. Handling things. Not helping. Not supporting. Handling." She glanced toward the dining table where my binder lay open. Budgets, phone numbers, handwritten notes. The blueprint of an entire event, resting on the labor of a woman she saw as background noise. Viviana reached for the binder. "Maybe I should take a look," she offered. I gently closed it before she could touch a single page. "Oh, there's no need," I said calmly. "I've got it all under control." For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. Not gratitude. Concern. Because people like Viviana are comfortable only when they believe they are in charge, even when they're not doing the work. She recovered quickly. "Well," she said lightly, "don't forget about the kids on Saturday. Andrea is bringing hers early." I tilted my head. Oh? Yes, she continued, as if it were already settled. They'll need someone to watch them during the ceremony and reception. There it was. No request, no discussion, just assumption. I smiled gently. We'll see, I said. Her eyebrows knitted together for half a second. What do you mean? I mean we'll see how the day unfolds, I replied. Weddings are unpredictable. She laughed awkwardly. Oh, yes, of course. But her smile didn't reach her eyes this time. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I wasn't angry. I was done. That evening, Gabriella came over. She brought wine and silence, the kind that understands without asking. You okay? She asked. I'm better than okay, I replied. I'm clear. She raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous. We laughed softly. I showed her the binder. All of this, I said, tapping the pages, exists only because I allow it to. Gabriella nodded slowly. They think you're the background, she said. They forget the background holds the whole picture together. The next morning, I started making phone calls. Not dramatic ones, professional ones. I called the caterer first. Yes. Hello, I said calmly. This is Antella. I need to cancel the buffet order. There was a pause. Is everything okay? Yes, I replied. I've simply changed my plans. Then the florist. Then the rental company. Each cancellation felt like placing a brick back into a wall I had been tearing down for decades. I lost some deposits. Money can be earned again. Respect cannot. I didn't tell Marco. I didn't warn Viviana. Because people who assume your silence is weakness don't deserve a heads up. That afternoon, I packed a small suitcase. Nothing dramatic. Just enough clothes for a few days. My medication. A book. My wedding ring, which I still wore out of habit. I placed the suitcase by the door. Then I sat down and wrote a letter. Not an angry one. Not a blaming one. A truthful one. I wrote about love, about boundaries, about how offering help does not mean surrendering dignity. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter, where it would be impossible to miss. That night, Marco called. Mom, everything okay? He asked. Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied. You sound different. I smiled to myself. That's because I finally am. He laughed nervously. You're not getting cold feet about the wedding, are you? No, I said calmly. I'm getting my footing back. There was a pause. Okay, he said slowly. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. Yes, I replied. You will. After I hung up, I stood in the living room and looked around one last time. This house had seen grief, resilience, love, and sacrifice. Now it would witness something new. Self-respect. I turned off the lights and went to bed early. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Because the hardest decision had already been made, and the consequences were no longer mine to carry. By the time the sun rose, the wedding plans were already unraveling, and no one knew yet. I woke before dawn, not because of anxiety, not because of fear, but because my mind was finally quiet. The house was still dark, wrapped in that peaceful silence that only exists before the world demands something from you. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, listening to my own breathing, feeling the steady rhythm of a heart that had survived far worse than a wedding. This wasn't impulsive. This was overdue. I dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance. A soft sweater, flat shoes, the kind of clothes you wear when you're walking away, not trying to impress anyone. Before leaving my room, I glanced once more at the photograph of Roberto. His smile seemed knowing now. "I'm okay," I whispered. The drive to Gabriella's house took 20 minutes. The streets were nearly empty, the sky just beginning to soften from black to gray. I felt like I was driving through a space between two lives, the one where I was needed for everything, and the one where I belonged to myself again. Gabriella was already awake. "You ready?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee. "I've never been more ready," I replied. We sat at her kitchen table, my phone placed neatly between us like a loaded object. I took a breath and opened my email. First message: caterer, cancelled. Second message: florist, cancelled. Third: chair and tent rental, cancelled. Each confirmation felt final, solid, real. I wasn't sabotaging a wedding. I was withdrawing my labor. And there is a difference. At mid-morning, my phone rang. Marco. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Mom?" His voice was rushed. "Did you cancel the caterer?" "Yes," I said calmly. There was a long silence. "What do you mean, yes?" he finally asked. "I mean I canceled it," I repeated. "The order was under my name." "But the wedding is in 2 days," he said, disbelief creeping into his voice. "I know. Why would you do that?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "Because I won't be cooking or babysitting," I replied. "And I won't be treated like staff." His breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "I overheard the plan," I said gently. "About the children. About me being convenient." The word hung between us. Marco didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed. "Mom, they were just joking." "No," I replied. "They were planning." "That doesn't mean they don't love you." "Love without respect is control," I said. "And I've had enough of that." He lowered his voice. "Viviana is freaking out." "I imagine she is. She says you're ruining everything." I smiled softly. "No," I said. "I'm simply no longer holding everything together." Another silence. "Where are you?" he asked. "I'm safe," I replied. "That's all you need to know." "You're not coming to the wedding?" "I didn't say that," I answered. "I said I'm not working it." When I ended the call, my hands were steady. No guilt, no regret, just resolve. By noon, the messages started coming. Viviana, Andrea, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "How could you do this? This is selfish. You're embarrassing the family." I didn't respond, because for the first time, their panic wasn't my responsibility. At 3 p.m., Viviana called. I let it ring. At 3:07, she called again. I answered. "Antella," she said sharply, dropping the sweetness entirely. "You had no right." "No right?" I repeated calmly. "Yes, this is our wedding, and that was my time," I replied. "My money, my energy. You promised," she snapped. "I offered," I corrected. "You assumed." Her voice rose. "Who's gonna watch the kids now?" I paused. "That was never my job." She laughed bitterly. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said simply. "You're acting like a victim." "No," I replied. "I'm acting like a woman who finally knows her worth." She hung up on me. Gabriella squeezed my hand. "That," she said, "was overdue." That evening, I checked into a small spa hotel on the outskirts of town. Nothing luxurious, just quiet. Clean sheets, A locked door. I placed my suitcase down and exhaled deeply. For the first time since Roberto died, I wasn't needed. And instead of feeling empty, I felt free. I ordered room service. I ate slowly. I slept without interruption. While elsewhere, chaos was unfolding. The next morning, my phone lit up nonstop. Marco again. "Mom," he said urgently, "we can't fix this in time." I know. The buffet, the kids, the setup, everything depended on you. I closed my eyes. "And that," I said gently, "is the problem." He didn't yell. He didn't blame. He sounded small. "I didn't realize." "I believe you," I replied. "But realization comes with consequences." By the time the wedding day arrived, I was sitting in a robe, sipping tea, listening to the quiet hum of the spa. My phone buzzed. A message from Marco. "Where are you?" I smiled. They were about to learn something important. And so was I. On the morning of the wedding, my son called, his voice shaking with panic. I woke before dawn. Not because of anxiety, not because of fear, but because my mind was finally quiet. The house was still dark, wrapped in that peaceful silence that only exists before the world demands something from you. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, listening to my own breathing, feeling the steady rhythm of a heart that had survived far worse than a wedding. This wasn't impulsive. This was overdue. I dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance. A soft sweater, flat shoes, the kind of clothes you wear when you're walking away, not trying to impress anyone. Before leaving my room, I glanced once more at the photograph of Roberto. His smile seemed knowing now. "I'm okay," I whispered. The drive to Gabriella's house took 20 minutes. The streets were nearly empty, the sky just beginning to soften from black to gray. I felt like I was driving through a space between two lives, the one where I was needed for everything, and the one where I belonged to myself again. Gabriella was already awake. "You ready?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee. "I've never been more ready," I replied. We sat at her kitchen table, my phone placed neatly between us like a loaded object. I took a breath and opened my email. First message, caterer, canceled. Second message, florist, canceled. Third, chair and tent rental, canceled. Each confirmation felt final, solid, real. I wasn't sabotaging a wedding. I was withdrawing my labor. And there is a difference. At mid-morning, my phone rang. Marco. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Mom," his voice was rushed. "Did you cancel the caterer?" "Yes," I said calmly. There was a long silence. "What do you mean, yes?" he finally asked. "I mean I canceled it," I repeated. "The order was under my name." "But the wedding is in 2 days," he said, disbelief creeping into his voice. "I know. Why would you do that?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "Because I won't be cooking or babysitting," I replied, "and I won't be treated like staff." His breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "I overheard the plan," I said gently. "About the children. About me being convenient." The word hung between us. Marco didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed. "Mom, they were just joking." "No," I replied. "They were planning." "That doesn't mean they don't love you." "Love without respect is control," I said, "and I've had enough of that." He lowered his voice. "Viviana is freaking out." I imagine she is. She says you're ruining everything. I smiled softly. No, I said. I'm simply no longer holding everything together. Another silence. Where are you? He asked. I'm safe, I replied. That's all you need to know. You're not coming to the wedding? I didn't say that, I answered. I said I'm not working it. When I ended the call, my hands were steady. No guilt, no regret, just resolve. By noon, the messages started coming. Viviana, Andrea, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. How could you do this? This is selfish. You're embarrassing the family. I didn't respond, because for the first time, their panic wasn't my responsibility. At 3 p.m., Viviana called. I let it ring. At 3:07, she called again. I answered. Antella, she said sharply, dropping the sweetness entirely. You had no right. No right? I repeated calmly. Yes, this is our wedding. And that was my time, I replied. My money, my energy. You promised, she snapped. I offered. I corrected. You assumed. Her voice rose. Who's going to watch the kids now? I paused. That was never my job. She laughed bitterly. You're really doing this? Yes, I said simply. You're acting like a victim. No, I replied. I'm acting like a woman who finally knows her worth. She hung up on me. Gabriella squeezed my hand. That, she said, was overdue. That evening, I checked into a small spa hotel on the outskirts of town. Nothing luxurious, just quiet. Clean sheets. A locked door. I placed my suitcase down and exhaled deeply. For the first time since Roberto died, I wasn't needed. And instead of feeling empty, I felt free. I ordered room service. I ate slowly. I slept without interruption. While elsewhere, chaos was unfolding. The next morning, my phone lit up non-stop. Marco again. Mom, he said urgently, we can't fix this in time. I know. The buffet, the caves, the setup, everything depended on you. I closed my eyes. And that, I said gently, is the problem. He didn't yell. He didn't blame. He sounded small. I didn't realize. I believe you, I replied. But realization comes with consequences. By the time the wedding day arrived, I was sitting in a robe, sipping tea, listening to the quiet hum of the spa. My phone buzzed. A message from Marco. Where are you? I smiled. They were about to learn something important. And so was I. On the morning of the wedding, my son called, his voice shaking with panic. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly for me. No rushing, no shouting, no frantic phone calls, at least not yet. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of my hotel room, warming the bed where I lay wrapped in a white robe, sipping chamomile tea. Outside, birds chirped as if the world hadn't shifted at all. For the first time in weeks, my body wasn't braced for someone else's emergency. I took my time. A slow shower. A gentle breakfast. A deep breath that reached places in my chest I hadn't felt open in years. Then my phone rang. Marco. I watched it vibrate on the table for a full 5 seconds before answering. Mom, he said, breathless. Where are you? I'm having breakfast, I replied calmly. What do you mean you're having breakfast? His voice cracked. The wedding starts in 3 hours. Yes, I said. I'm aware. There was shouting in the background. Children crying. chairs scraping against the floor. "You're not here," he said, panic rising. "Nothing is set up. The caterer isn't coming. The kids are already everywhere." I closed my eyes and listened. This was the sound of a structure collapsing after its foundation was removed. "Mom, please," he said, "I need you." I didn't respond immediately, not to punish him, but because this moment mattered. "Marco," I said finally, "what exactly do you need me to do?" "Everything," he blurted out. "We don't have food, childcare, or anyone coordinating." I nodded to myself. "That's what happens," I said gently, "when one person carries everything and no one notices." His voice dropped. "I didn't think." "I know," I replied. "And today, you're thinking." There was a long pause. "Are you coming?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said, "as a guest. But we need you now." "I'm not available for labor today," I replied calmly. "Only presence." He exhaled sharply. "You're choosing this moment to make a point?" "No," I said. "You chose this moment when you made assumptions." The line went quiet. Then he whispered, "Viviana is losing it." I imagine she is. She was. By the time I arrived at the venue, the scene looked nothing like the elegant celebration I had once planned. Children ran between tables unsupervised. One was crying near the cake stand. Another had spilled juice on a rented tablecloth. Andrea stood in heels, yelling into her phone. The decorations were crooked. Half the chairs were still stacked. Viviana stood near the entrance in her wedding dress, mascara streaked, hair undone, fury radiating from every inch of her body. When she saw me, her face hardened. "You did this," she hissed. I looked at her calmly. "No," I replied. I stepped back. Marco rushed toward me, tie loosened, eyes exhausted. "Mom, thank God." I placed my hand on his arm. "I'm here," I said. "I just won't be fixing anything." Viviana scoffed. "So you're just gonna watch everything fall apart?" I met her gaze steadily. "I'm going to attend my son's wedding," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." She laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said softly. "I'm done being invisible." A child tugged at her dress. "Aunt Viviana, I'm hungry," she snapped. "Not now." I turned to the child. "Sweetheart, go find your mother," I said gently. Viviana's eyes widened. "You don't get to tell anyone what to do anymore," she snapped. "You're right," I replied, "and I'm comfortable with that." The ceremony started late. Very late. Guests whispered. Some checked their phones. Others watched the chaos with open curiosity. When the officiant finally began, Marco kept glancing at me. Not with anger, with understanding. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the scope of what I had always carried. The reception was worse. There was no proper meal. Only last-minute snacks someone had picked up from a nearby store. No childcare, no flow. Andrea pulled Marco aside, clearly furious. "This is a disaster," he said. She snapped. "Your mother ruined everything." Marco looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "We did." Viviana overheard. Her face changed. "What?" she demanded. "We assumed," Marco continued. "We took advantage." Silence fell between them. The realization landed hard. Later, Marco approached me again. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Truly." I searched his face. "I believe you," I replied, "because now you understand." Viviana didn't speak to me again that day, but she watched. Watched as guests thanked me for attending. Watched as I sat calmly, unbothered. Watched as I laughed, free of obligation. That night, as the celebration fizzled into awkward exhaustion, Marco walked me to my car. "I didn't realize how much you did," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "You were never supposed to." He nodded slowly. "I want things to change." "Then they will," I said, "if you make them." I drove away before the last song played. Not angry, not bitter, just whole. For the first time in my life, I had attended a family event without being responsible for its success. And the world didn't end. It simply rearranged itself. After the wedding, the messages started pouring in, and not all of them were kind. The day after the wedding, I woke up in my own bed. The house felt different, lighter somehow. Not emptier, but calmer, like it had exhaled with me. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, landing on the familiar furniture that had held so many years of giving. For the first time in a long while, nothing was expected of me. No calls to make, no food to prepare, no problems to solve. I made myself a simple breakfast and sat at the table without rushing. My phone lay face down beside my plate. I could feel it vibrating occasionally, but I didn't tune it over right away. I wanted to enjoy this quiet. When I finally picked it up, there were dozens of messages. Some from relatives, some from friends, some from people who hadn't spoken to me in years, but suddenly had opinions. "You embarrassed the family. That wasn't the time to make a statement. You could have handled it privately. But also, I admire your strength." The messages contradicted each other, just like people always do when they're forced to examine their own behavior. I didn't respond to most of them, because explanations are often demanded by people who benefited from your silence. Later that morning, Marco came by. He didn't call first. He knocked softly, the way he used to when he was a teenager and knew he was in trouble. When I opened the door, he looked tired, but different. The defensiveness was gone. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. He stepped inside and looked around, as if seeing the house through new eyes. "I never noticed how much work it takes just to keep everything running," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "That's the nature of invisible labor," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had written the letter he still hadn't mentioned. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for the wedding." I waited. "For years," he continued, "I assumed you were fine, that you liked doing everything, that you didn't need anything back. That assumption was comfortable for you," I said gently. He nodded. "I see that now." There was a long silence. "Viviana is angry," he admitted, "but she's also embarrassed." I stirred my tea slowly. "Embarrassment can be useful," I said. "It teaches people where the line is. She thinks you humiliated her." "I refuse to be humiliated," I replied. "There's a difference." He sighed deeply. "I should have stopped it," he said. "I should have spoken up." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." He looked at me, eyes moist. "I don't want to lose you." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You won't," I said. "But things can't go back to the way they were." That afternoon, I received a message from Viviana. Just one line. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Yes, we do." She came the next evening. No makeup, no polished tone, just quiet tension. She didn't sit right away. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," she said. "That's the problem," I replied calmly. "You didn't think they would." She swallowed. "I thought you liked being needed." I met her gaze. "Being needed isn't the same as being respected." She looked down. "My mother never helped with anything," she said quietly. "I guess I overcorrected." "That explains behavior," I replied. "It doesn't excuse it." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the way I spoke, for assuming." I let the silence sit. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "But forgiveness doesn't erase boundaries." Her eyes flicked up. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "I help when I'm asked, I attend when I'm invited, and I step away when I'm taken for granted." She absorbed this quietly. "I can respect that," she said. "We'll see," I replied kindly. After she left, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, relief, because clarity is lighter than resentment. In the weeks that followed, things changed in small but meaningful ways. Marco called before visiting. Viviana asked instead of assumed. Family gatherings were planned, with me, not around me. At a birthday dinner, someone asked, "Antella, would you like to help with dessert?" And when I said no, the world didn't collapse. They simply nodded. That's when I knew the lesson had landed. One evening, Gabriella came over with a bottle of wine. "You did it," she said proudly. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I stopped doing everything." She laughed. "That's harder." As I sat there, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Viviana, not at Marco, not even at myself. Because resentment thrives where boundaries are absent, and I had finally drawn mine. Weeks later, my son said something that told me everything had truly changed. A month passed before Marco and I truly talked. Not about logistics, not about family gatherings, but about us. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. He came over without an agenda, carrying a small bag of pastries from the bakery down the street, the one I used to visit every Saturday when he was little. "I remembered you liked the almond ones," he said, setting them on the table. I smiled. "I do." We sat together in the living room, sunlight filtering in through the window. The house felt steady now. No tension humming beneath the surface, no unspoken expectations. Marco shifted uncomfortably. "I've been thinking," he began. I waited. "I used to believe being a good son meant letting you handle everything," he said. "I thought independence meant I didn't need to worry about you." "That's a common misunderstanding," I replied gently. He nodded. "I see now that I wasn't independent. I was dependent on your silence." The words surprised me, not because they were dramatic, because they were true. "I didn't know how to ask for help without taking," he continued, "so I took." I reached for my tea, letting the moment breathe. "When your father died," I said quietly, "I had to become strong quickly. I didn't have time to fall apart." "I remember," Marco said softly. "I made a mistake." I continued. "I taught you that love looks like endurance, that women absorb discomfort." His eyes filled. "I don't want to pass that on," he said. "Then don't," I replied. "Model something better." He took a deep breath. "I want to start showing up for you," he said. "Not because I feel guilty, but because I see you." That sentence settled into my bones. I don't need rescuing, I said. I need consideration. He nodded firmly. I can do that. Over the next weeks, he proved it. Not with grand gestures, with consistency. He called before stopping by. He asked before making plans. He defended boundaries even when it was uncomfortable. Once, at a family dinner, an aunt joked, "Antella will handle it." Marco corrected her gently. "No," he said. "She'll decide." I pretended not to hear, but my heart heard everything. Viviana watched these changes closely. At first, she seemed wary, as if afraid I was slowly pulling Marco away. But eventually, she began to understand something important. Boundaries don't break families. They reveal who's willing to grow. One evening, she came to me with an unexpected request. "Would you like to help me plan a small dinner?" she asked. "Only if you want to." I considered her carefully. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." And when I became tired halfway through, I stopped. No one complained. No one guilted me. They adjusted. That's what respect looks like. Weeks later, Marco said something that told me everything had changed. We were walking through a park near my house, leaves crunching beneath our feet. "I used to be afraid you'd stop loving me if you stopped giving," he admitted. I stopped walking. "Marco," I said gently, "love that requires self-erasure isn't love. It's fear." He swallowed. "I know that now." We resumed walking. "Thank you for not disappearing," he said quietly. "I didn't disappear," I replied. "I arrived." He smiled. That night, as I sat alone with a book, I realized something surprising. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval. Not for gratitude. Not for permission. I had stepped fully into my life. And because of that, my relationships became lighter, truer. Not perfect, but honest. Just when I thought things had settled, Viviana did something I never expected. The calm we had built over the past few weeks felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a deep, unpredictable river. Viviana's transformation seemed real. Her apologies were sincere, her actions thoughtful. But old habits die hard, and the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. It was a Friday evening when the challenge arrived. Marco called me from work, his voice tight with urgency. "Mom, something's happened," he said. And I immediately felt the weight of dread settle over me. "What is it?" I asked, my heart already racing. "It's Viviana. She's disappeared." I froze, a chill running down my spine. "Disappeared? What do you mean?" "Her car was still in the driveway this morning, but when I got home, she was gone. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and her apartment is empty." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt anger and fear mingling inside me. Had she relapsed into her old manipulative ways? Was she planning another betrayal? Or worse, had something happened to her? I drove to her apartment immediately. The building was quiet, almost eerily so. Her apartment door was locked, the blinds drawn tight. I knocked several times, calling her name. No answer. My chest tightened. Something was very wrong. I returned home, trying to piece together what could have happened. Marco sat in the living room, running his hands through his hair. "She left a note," he finally said, sliding an envelope toward me. I opened it with trembling hands. The note was short, written in Viviana's neat handwriting. I need to figure things out. I'm sorry for worrying you. I just need space to understand who I am. I'll return when I'm ready." The words, though polite, carried a sting. She hadn't disappeared because of harm or danger, but because she had chosen to step away without warning, leaving a brokenness in our fragile trust. The test had begun, the true measure of her transformation and our patience. Over the next days, uncertainty hung over our home like a storm cloud. Marco was restless, pacing, waiting for news. I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that her note showed awareness, not malice. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. Could we really trust her now? Then came the calls. Viviana reached out sporadically, her voice soft and hesitant. She explained that she had been visiting her parents, reflecting on her past behavior, and working to confront the impulses that had caused so much pain. "I'm trying to be better," she said one evening, her voice almost a whisper over the phone. "But it's harder than I thought. Old habits, they cling." I listened, trying to hold on to the patience I had cultivated over weeks of her progress. "Viviana," I said firmly, "recognizing the struggle is part of it, but you can't avoid responsibility. You need to come back, face us, and continue proving that change is real." She sighed, a sound heavy with regret. "I know. I needed to prove to myself that I could resist the old patterns without falling back into manipulation." Her honesty was undeniable. For the first time, she admitted that she was accountable, not just to us, but to herself. I realized that transformation isn't a straight line. It's a battlefield of setbacks, doubts, and choices. After several tense days, Viviana finally returned. She walked in cautiously, as if testing the ground before fully stepping in. Marco was the first to speak. "Viviana," he began, his tone a mix of relief and wariness. "Where have you been?" She looked at him, eyes downcast. "I told you, I was working on myself. I needed to confront the parts of me that were toxic, the impulses that made me hurt the people I care about." I studied her carefully, seeing the genuine weight in her posture. She wasn't trying to charm or manipulate. She was humbled, weary from her internal struggle. "I understand," I said softly, "but absence alone isn't proof of change. Your actions now will determine if we can rebuild trust fully." Viviana nodded. "I know. I'll prove it, step by step." The next weeks were the real test. Viviana threw herself into the work of mending relationships. She volunteered to help with family matters without imposing her opinions. She apologized publicly to relatives she had wronged, acknowledging her past selfishness. She even asked for guidance from Marco and me on how to communicate better, showing humility that had been absent for so long. Yet the hardest test came unexpectedly. One night, a distant relative called, claiming there was a problem with some financial documents. Documents that Viviana had once manipulated for personal gain. Fear flickered in my chest as memories of betrayal resurfaced. Had she relapsed? Viviana arrived at my side, calm but resolute. "Let me handle this," she said. And she did. She corrected the mistakes, communicated openly with the relatives, and accepted responsibility without shifting blame or hiding facts. She faced the consequences of her past actions with courage, not charm or deceit. That night, as I watched her quietly resolve the situation, I realized something profound. Transformation isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you confront them. Viviana had failed in the past, but her willingness to face consequences, to remain accountable, showed growth deeper than mere apologies. Weeks turned into months, and the family began to heal. The tension that had once dominated our home softened into understanding. Viviana no longer sought control. She offered support. Marco's trust, once tentative, grew steadily. And I, too, found that my heart could forgive, not because the past disappeared, but because we were building a future together, cautiously, patiently, and honestly. One evening, as we gathered for a quiet dinner, Viviana raised her glass. "To growth," she said softly, "to accountability, and to the family we are learning to become." Marco and I clinked glasses with her, the sound fragile yet hopeful. In that moment, I felt the culmination of the journey, the reckoning, the struggle, the transformation, all converging into a fragile peace. And yet, I knew deep inside that life would always test us. Trust is never permanent. It must be nurtured continuously. But for the first time, I believed in Viviana's sincerity. The storm hadn't vanished, but it had shifted from chaos to a gentle, cleansing rain, one that could nurture growth instead of destruction. As the evening light faded, I reflected on the path we had traveled. The betrayals, the pain, the reckonings, they had brought us to this point, and while scars remained, so did hope. Viviana had faced her reckoning, and we had all learned a profound lesson. True transformation requires courage, accountability, and the willingness to confront the darkest parts of oneself. Only then can trust be rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than before. And for the first time in years, I felt that the future, uncertain, fragile, but full of possibility, was finally ours to shape. Just when it seemed we had overcome everything, a revelation shattered our fragile peace, and nothing would ever be the same again. Life had begun to settle into a delicate rhythm. Viviana's presence no longer felt like a storm cloud looming over our home, but more like a cautious spring breeze, tentative yet full of potential. Marco had started to trust her again, and I allowed myself moments of relief I hadn't felt in years. It was a fragile peace, but after so much turbulence, even a fragile peace felt like a miracle. Then it happened. It was a late Thursday evening when the call came. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, a sense of unease curling in my stomach. "Hello?" I said. The voice on the other end was calm, but chilling. "Is this Antella?" "Yes. Who is this?" I asked, gripping the edge of the table. "My name is Carmine," the voice said. "I'm a lawyer. I represent certain parties who have interests in your family's estate. There's a matter you need to know about, something concerning Viviana." My heart skipped a beat. "Viviana? What are you talking about?" "There's evidence that she may have manipulated her way into accessing funds in the past. It's complicated, and it could get messy if not addressed immediately." I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. Could this be true? After all the progress she had made, was this a trap? Or had she slipped back into deception? I hung up and called Marco. "We need to confront Viviana," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Something's come up, and it's serious." Viviana arrived within the hour, her face calm but weary. She sensed the tension immediately. "What is it?" she asked, glancing between us. I handed her the details from the call. "This lawyer says you may have manipulated funds in the past. They want to investigate. We need honesty, Viviana, right now." She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly. I need to tell you the whole truth, she said softly. Not just the part you see now, but everything I did before I tried to change. She recounted her past actions in painstaking detail, how she had taken advantage of family trust, misused funds, and sometimes acted purely out of self-interest. Every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal she had committed years ago. Marco and I listened, stunned, our emotions tangled between shock, anger, and the strange relief of honesty. I am so sorry, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know words can't undo the past, but I want you to see that I've changed. I've been working on myself every day since I left. I'm not that person anymore. It was a moment of truth, a final reckoning. I looked at her, searching for the sincerity in her eyes, and there it was, raw, vulnerable, unmasked. No charm, no manipulative tactics, only a young woman taking responsibility for the darkness she once embraced. Marco, who had been silent, finally spoke. Viviana, this is serious. You could have ruined everything. But I see that you're being honest now. That honesty, it counts. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision we were about to make. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about seeing someone confront the truth and make a conscious choice to change. The following days were intense. The lawyer's investigation was thorough, questioning every detail of Viviana's past actions. She faced it all openly, providing documentation, admitting mistakes, and never attempting to hide the truth. Watching her navigate the scrutiny, I saw a transformation that went beyond words. It was action, accountability, and courage in its purest form. The test was complete, but it was also the hardest yet. Could a person who had caused so much pain truly rebuild trust? Could she rise from the ashes of her past without letting it define her forever? The answer came in a way I hadn't expected. Viviana didn't just defend herself, she became proactive, helping organize family finances, ensuring transparency, and even creating safeguards to prevent anyone, including herself, from repeating past mistakes. She worked tirelessly, not for recognition, but to prove that change wasn't temporary. It was a commitment. One evening, after the investigation concluded, Marco and I sat in the living room with Viviana. The tension of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a quiet but profound acknowledgement of growth. "Mom, I'm proud of you," Marco said, his eyes full of a mix of relief and admiration. "You saw the truth, faced it, and let her prove herself." I smiled, my own heart lighter than it had been in years. "She's not perfect," I said, glancing at Viviana, "but she's trying. And sometimes that effort, faced with honesty, is all we can ask for." Viviana reached for my hand, her grip firm yet gentle. "Thank you, Antella, for believing in me, even when I made it so hard. I know I've hurt you, all of you. I can't take it back, but I promise to keep proving I'm worthy of your trust." Tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I felt not just relief, but a sense of possibility. A chance to rebuild our family on a foundation stronger than fear, deception, or resentment. In the weeks that followed, Viviana continued to demonstrate her commitment. She supported Marco in his work, helped me with family matters, and even reached out to relatives she had wronged to mend fractured relationships. Slowly, the family began to heal, not as it had been, but in a new form. Resilient and honest. One quiet morning, I watched Viviana help Marco with a small task in the garden. She laughed at something he said, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like old times. Simple, genuine, and free from manipulation. The path had been long and treacherous, but we had arrived at a fragile, beautiful truth. People can change if they face themselves honestly, and forgiveness is possible if it is earned through action. That evening, as the sun set in a golden haze, I reflected on our journey. Betrayal had tested us. Fear had threatened to tear us apart. But honesty, accountability, and courage had guided us to a place where trust could be rebuilt. Viviana was still learning, still growing, but the darkness that once dominated her had given way to something new. A promise, not a guarantee, but a promise of sincerity and effort. And in that promise, we found peace. Not the naive peace of ignorance, but the hard-won peace that comes from knowing that even the deepest scars can heal, that even the most broken trust can be mended, and that love, when tempered with honesty and courage, can endure almost anything. As I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a quiet prayer. May we never forget the lessons of the past, but may we also embrace the hope of tomorrow. And may the strength we found in forgiveness guide us through whatever storms are still to come. Because life, as I had learned, is never without trials, but with courage, accountability, and love, even the fiercest storms can lead to a brighter horizon. The tale ends on a note of hard-earned hope. Viviana's journey from manipulation to accountability, and the family's journey from distrust to cautious forgiveness, create a powerful message about the complexity of human behavior, redemption, and resilience.